Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode I take a look at the 2011 film Red Riding Hood, starring Amanda Seyfried, Gary Oldman, and Billy Burke. I may have pronounced at least one of those names incorrectly. In any case, Billy Burke was also in the movie Twilight, and this film, like Twilight, it has that very weird teenage romance vibe to it. It is certainly not a horror movie, but in any case, as an aside, it has a 10% on the tomato meter and a 39% on the audience score. It is certainly rotten. I would never say that this is anything other than completely rotten. It had a over $30 million budget, above $30 million, and yet I can't figure out exactly where the money might have gone, except perhaps for the sound stage that they shot most all of this film on. And you know, right off the bat, that was the most kind of disheartening and disappointing thing about this film, when the CGI of the film's opening shows you this rather large village, medieval or Middle Ages village up in you know, a mountainous area of what you can presume is somewhere in Europe. You get that vibe, you know, that this is a rather large village, rather elaborately constructed village. And then when you actually see the characters walking around inside what is definitely a small soundstage, and it feels like a very artificial slice of this majestic village you see on the opening CGI, it's very disappointing. It doesn't do justice to the $30 million budget, that's for sure. And this rotten movie, well, it's rotten largely because right off the bat you can tell that it is set as, you know, the opening weeks of winter, I would guess, by the weather that they're showing. And yet there is no sense of cold. This feels very sterile and clean, and the environment feels very fake, nothing authentic about it. Characters are walking around in what are obviously summer attire of a fictional, you know, Disney-esque sort of middle-aged look. Summer attire for the women, certainly, and the women are dressed in very colorful outfits, too colorful for the time period, and the men are dressed in what amounts to very thin gray and brown leather type clothing. It's definitely summer type clothing, and yet they're in the winter time. There is snow on the ground, there's snow falling, and while this snow is on the ground and snow is falling, you have trees that have clearly leaves still on them. The leaves are still there as though you're in autumn, and yet it's covered with snow, which is obviously fake snow. You don't even see the characters, you know, you don't see their breath coming out of their mouths or anything. They're walking around even at night, and even in the mountains at night, with summer clothes on, and they don't seem, you know, in the least bit cold. They're just pretending like they're walking through fake snow. The snow is laughably fake, and it's off-putting that you're supposed to get some kind of winter atmosphere out of this. The whole thing is like a fake, really bad fake indoor soundstage environment. There's even a scene up in the snowy mountains where villagers, they go hunting a wolf that lives in this gigantic cavernous lair up on, you know, the side of a mountain. You don't see the breasts of the villagers up there. They're not cold in the slightest, and you know, they're trudging along with their torches in a wintertime scene, certainly, but it's obvious that they're not in wintertime. It's all fake. It's very off-putting. The atmosphere is really bad. The story itself isn't really that bad until it gets about 40 minutes in, and then it becomes completely boring and nonsensical. A lot of the scenery, a lot of the set pieces are nonsensical. Not only is it too clean and sterile and bright, and remember, you're in wintertime and it's still too clean, sterile, and bright, but you have a werewolf hunter priest who shows up, played by Gary Oldman, and right off the bat it's kind of off-putting because his two you know, bodyguard soldier warriors are both Africans. They are, well, they are British or American actors, but they're certainly Africans of descent, and they are somehow working as werewolf hunters along with this Catholic priest in medieval Europe. It completely doesn't make sense. And along along with this, Gary Oldman's Catholic priest character, he is towing a large metal of some type elephant, which is hollow inside like a tea kettle, and it's designed to put prisoners inside of, and kind of steam them or cook them to death as a form of torture. It is very strange. It makes no sense. Another thing that makes no sense is Gary Oldman needs to convince the villagers to go along with his werewolf hunting spiel. And in his attempt to convince the villagers to listen to him, he presents this gold-clad astronomy model of, I guess it's supposed to be our solar system, and it shows like a nonsensical solar system explaining the blood moon that's about to appear. And it doesn't make any sense, because not only is astronomy not known during this time period, but even if the Catholic Church had constructed a model of our solar system, as ridiculous as the science would have let them do, you know, this would all be lost on medieval villagers. They wouldn't know what planets were or why somebody was showing them this model of the solar system. It's complete nonsense. So let's get into the audience reviews. I wouldn't even know where to start. I actually assembled quite a list of nonsensical stuff in this. But the biggest crime of this movie is simply that it becomes boring, and I'll state it right off the bat. At about 35 minutes into this, it's just, you just wish it was over. It becomes utterly boring, and it drags on for, you know, another 2 hours. It goes on for a solid running time of 2 hours, and, you know, by 35 minutes in, you're wishing it would just end, but it doesn't, and it's just torture to go through this thing. You want to hit the fast forward or skip through it, and the ending is even worse. The end of this movie is pointless. It kind of is anticlimactic, and has the character of Red Riding Hood simply, you know, becoming a recluse in the woods and making peace with the werewolves, or with a werewolf that shows up. It's completely nonsensical. There's no point to it. But anyway, I'm getting derailed, so let's go into the actual audience reviews. Right off the bat, we have a 2-star review from May 27th of 2019. Making this sort of still relevant. And again, I say this is still relevant because this actually showed up on one of the HBO channels a couple of days ago. That's why, although this film was already on my list to do a rotten review of, it kind of got bumped to the top of my list because I got to see it on one of the HBO channels, yeah, like a day ago. So, 2-star review. The setting is nice, but the cuts, Jesus Christ, the cuts. I wanted to praise the camera work, but honestly, the movie has nothing going for it. Even the color scheme is bad. Yeah, 2 stars, I'll say no. This is 1 star, peaking out at 1 star just for the effort of making a film called Red Riding Hood. There's nothing else redeemable about this, so I say 1 star maximum. And this reviewer says the cuts. Well, it's not really the cuts. Unless he's referring to the shaky cam. There are 2 or 3 shaky cam scenes in which you're supposed to feel afraid as the audience as somebody sneaks up on Red Riding Hood, and this is shown with a shaky cam that kind of approaches her while her back is turned. It does this a couple of times, and it's not scary at all, and in fact it's not the big bad wolf sneaking up on her. It is just another character that approaches her when her back is turned, and you're supposed to be scared of this. It's supposed to be like a jump scare or something, but it's done with shaky cam. So that's all I can think of this reviewer might have been talking about with the cuts. The camera work, no, the camera work doesn't have anything going for it at all. The color scheme, again, I mentioned the color scheme. All the villagers are dressed in these colorful outfits, and, you know, even the interiors of the, you know, the village structures, they're very clean, dust-free. They have no atmosphere, no smoke effect. I mean, you go, at one point you go into the blacksmith's house, or the blacksmith structure, and this structure, this cabin-like structure, doesn't even have ventilation or a chimney or a place for the smoke from this rather large forge that's inside to go, and yet the air is clean and crisp inside, and nobody's coughing or choking, and there's no evidence that the outside of this, from the outside of this building, that there's any kind of giant forge inside. It's completely ridiculous, and you see this also like in the tavern, in which, you know, even the windows windowsill areas of this tavern are completely dust-free and clean. It's very Disney-esque in this way, like it could have passed for something on a Disney cartoon, except this is not a cartoon. This is actually supposed to be a real set, a lifelike set, and it's just very bizarre and stupid. Let's continue down. A 5-star review. The storyline is great. All in all, everything made sense. I don't believe you. I don't believe that review. This wouldn't even pass in a cartoon fashion because it simply becomes nonsensical and boring after about 30 minutes. There's just nothing more to get out of this. It goes nowhere. There's no climax. There's no rising tension to a climax. And the end of the movie isn't even the climax. It just goes on and meanders, continuing this love story that also goes nowhere with the main character, Red Riding Hood. It's very like Twilight, and that's why I mentioned Billy Burke being in this, because he's not the only thing that made me remember Twilight. He played Bella's dad in Twilight. I've seen him in a few other rotten movies, and he plays the father of Red Riding Hood. And Red Riding Hood just has this romance where she's got like 2 different romantic interests in this film. Maybe 3, depending on how you want to look at it. There's no actual villain. It's very convoluted. The girl, nobody gets the girl. The girl doesn't get anybody. It's kind of like a Twilight type story in which, you know, the girl just can't have her romance that she really needs to have. And there are more than one romantic, potential romantic suitors in this. It's very like Twilight, except at least Twilight had a bigger budget and it had some weird stuff. You could laugh at it. This one's not bad enough to laugh at, and it's just kind of gives you the failed vibe. It wanted to be like a type of Twilight mixed with Red Riding Hood mixed with werewolves. Very strange, and it's just very off-putting to see Billy Burke in it because he was straight up in Twilight as the dad of the rather unlikable female character in that movie. Now this character, Red Riding Hood's not unlikable. Amanda Seyfried, she doesn't do a bad job in her acting, but she simply has nothing to work with. She's surrounded by complete stupidity. The set design she's surrounded with is completely off-putting and stupid, and the storyline is dumb. She's not the fatal flaw in this, and she's not unlikable like the character was in Twilight, but she's just like not able to save this thing, even with her acting being all right. Let's continue. 1/2 star. Predictable story, sleepy screenplay, boring triangle love. Yeah, boring love triangle. It tried to do kind of a Twilight thing and just completely failed. And Twilight's an abysmal film to begin with, and this just failed to live up to that in every way. 1 star. One of the silliest movies I've ever seen. For a supposed thriller about a bloodthirsty wolf, there's next to no blood or action. Lots of elements are badly executed and jarring, taking you out of the story. There's a laughably fake-looking wolf head on a stick at one point. The movie also begins in what appears to be autumn, but everyone is wearing short sleeves and it seems warm out. Then by the end of the day, it is the height of winter. Yet Amanda Seyfried continues to run around in short sleeves. Yeah, exactly. This movie actually opens up in what appears to be late summer, early fall. Then, like the reviewer says, within 20 minutes, all of a sudden it's the dead of winter, yet everyone is still wearing summer clothes. They're never cold. You never see their breath. There's absolutely no indication that it's winter. And there's a really bad like festival celebration scene that's so laughably bad and cheap, and at one point some characters are laying down on top of the snow outside in the village, and you can see straight up that the snow is fake, that it's just some kind of white powder that's been put on the ground. There's nothing environmentally in the set that's even halfway competent. It's so obviously fake. Let's continue. 1 star. The only thing frightening about this flop was the lifeless acting and anemic dialogue. Yeah, well, Gary Oldman is actually in this, and I don't know how or why. He needed a paycheck, I guess. It's just frighteningly bad because he actually tries and he takes his role seriously, but his role is so stupid and his dialogue is so stupid and the actions of his character are so ridiculous, unbelievable, and stupid and illogical, and yet he comes across as really trying to perform for his role, which just makes it more ironic, and I'm just left thinking all through this thing, why is Gary Oldman in this and why did he do this to himself? Very bizarre. You know, some of the other acting, you know, the acting of the two, you know, male love interests to Red Riding Hood, their acting was Twilight level bad. But Gary Oldman's was actually serious. He was actually trying, and yet he was trying in something that's so ridiculously bad that it just makes him look stupid for trying, if you will. Let's continue on. 5 stars. Is there a Red Riding Hood 2? And if there are, when can I see it? I'm going to take that as sarcasm, definitely. 1 star. Woefully uninspired retelling of the classic fairy tale. All the cast under 30 picked for their looks rather than any discernible acting ability. And don't they know it? Red Riding Smug. Yeah, it's like trying to be Twilight. The actors look a little better than the weirdos in Twilight, but it's completely stupid. There's nothing romantic about it. There's nothing tension-filled about this. It fails as a thriller. It fails as a romance. There's not even a real ending to this. When you have your ending, it's completely unclimactic. It's completely illogical. It's completely boring. And then the movie continues on for another 5 minutes of trying to be a love story, and it feels like nothing, like it's just wasting footage, and you just want it to be over so badly. You just want to shut it off, and yet I couldn't shut it off because I had to actually sit through it to do this rotten review, but believe me, I wanted to shut it off. 4.5 stars. Archie Rice did an amazing job on scaring me. I don't know who Archie Rice is. That means he's irrelevant. And there was nothing scary in this film. In fact, it was laughable. There's a scene in which Gary Oldman's character gets his hand and wrist, like the lower part of his arm, ripped off by a werewolf. It's completely stupid. You know, it's like it has the vibe of a movie that wants to be R-rated, and yet they don't show any blood or gore. It's kind of just like props of people's arms that are sitting there with a little blood dribbled at the end. In fact, there's an opening scene in which Red Riding Hood's sister is supposedly killed by a wolf or a werewolf, one or the other, it doesn't matter, because it simply looks like her body is laying there and maybe her throat got slit by somebody's knife. There's a little puddle of what could be blood around her, and she's just otherwise unharmed and laying on her side in the, between the bales of hay on a farm. Not somebody that looks like the victim of a wolf attack, and I think this movie's the victim of trying to be PG, and that's why it seems like a Disney movie that wanted to be R-rated, but they just weren't allowed to be R-rated or show any gore. It's completely PG type of gore with fake prop arms being ripped off, and really stupid. 1 star. Red Riding Hood is brought to us by the team that brought us the Twilight series, and you can tell from the boring script to the stone-faced characters. Well, it could be true. I don't know. I didn't research if actually the same producers were behind this as Twilight, but it felt like it. It really felt like it. Some of the actors were the same. I think some of the bit players were also in Twilight. But straight up Billy Burke was, and this felt like a bad, boring ripoff of Twilight with werewolves mixed in. 5 stars. You know it is better than what critics say. You need a horror creepy movie, then here you go, guys. She'll you find out who the wolf is. Just think it's a mystery movie, so that's where you come in to find out who the wolf is. I've read the book before. It's as good as the movie. This reviewer's totally out to lunch. Their English is totally out to lunch as well. You know, at the beginning of this movie, you're kind of suspecting that grandma is the, Red Riding Hood's grandma is the werewolf. It turns out, no, her dad is the werewolf. Her grandmother could have been the werewolf. It doesn't say she's not or she is, but it just reveals that, in fact, her dad was the werewolf, Billy Burke. He was the werewolf the whole time. And it's very strange because earlier in the movie, the werewolf telepathically communicates with Red Riding Hood, and it's almost like the werewolf has a romantic interest in her and wants her to run off with it somewhere else outside of the village to another land. But then when you find out it's her dad that's a werewolf, you're kind of left thinking, is her dad a pedophile? Did he want to molest her or something? What's going on with that? Because her dad almost like put moves on her, earlier as the werewolf, and then later he said that he wanted to run off to the city, or he had before, and he wanted to take Red Riding Hood with him. but it's got a weird vibe to that, as though like her dad has somehow got a romantic interest in her. It's clearly they set that up in the movie. It wasn't an accident or something I picked up on off in left field. It's like they meant to do that, and I'm kind of wondering why, because again, Red Riding Hood has two romantic interests of her own age, and then I say there could be a third one because it actually throws her dad in there as kind of like being some kind of weird romantic interest of hers, or he had thoughts about her. Very strange, because again, this movie's trapped in PG world, so like the gore, it can't really go there, but it wants to. 5 stars. Come on, why would it get a low rating? It's a good fairy tale. Who is the wolf? Well, that's where you come and watch the movie. Again, I don't know where these reviewers are coming at with the 5 stars. It's like they're definitely living in a small village in eastern Romania or something, and they think this movie is just, you know, a fine example of an American blockbuster. I disagree. 2 stars. Director Catherine Hardwicke attempts to Twilight the Grimm's classic fairy tale in Red Riding Hood. The story follows a small village that calls in the aid of a famed werewolf hunter to help them fight a werewolf that's been attacking them. Meanwhile, a young woman plans to run off with her lover, but has second thoughts when she begins to suspect that he may be the wolf. Starring Amanda Seyfried, Gary Oldman, Billy Burke, and Virginia Madsen, the film has a pretty solid cast. Oh, thank you for mentioning Virginia Madsen. She's the mother of Red Riding Hood. Again, she could or could not be a werewolf. It's like she's suspected, but she's not shown to be one or not be one. Just like the grandmother, you can kind of assume she is, because they say that the werewolf stuff is passed down through the family, and her dad is certainly one. Now, let's break this down here. Yes, it's a failed attempt at a Twilight with Red Riding Hood. The village calling in the aid of a famed werewolf hunter. No, that's not shown in this film. He just shows up. He's like a Catholic priest. They call him Father. He wears a crucifix on his neck. He's definitely a Catholic priest of some sort. But nobody calls him. He just kind of shows up. He rides into town with some African soldiers. It's very bizarre. And no one called him in, and he's not famed. He's not famed. He just kind of takes over the town and threatens everybody into going along with his scheme to hunt down the werewolf. It's not explained how he knows there's a werewolf in the village. You can kind of, you know, fill in the blanks with your mind as an audience member and assume that somebody passed the word to him through the church. But then again, there's never any church really shown in this movie. There's like a building that's kind of portrayed as a church, almost like a little Western storefront kind of prop of a church with some supposedly holy ground in front that the werewolf can't get on top of. It's very strange. So saying that they called in this famed werewolf hunter, that's not shown in this film at all. Yeah, the woman suspects, Red Riding Hood suspects a few different people could be the werewolf, and the audience is kind of put on a kind of a cheap wild goose chase to suspect these people too. It's all a fail because you just don't care. You don't care who the werewolf is because you just want this thing to end. You're 30 minutes in and you're just completely bored by it all. 5 stars. Come on, 10% by critics. That's just crazy. I found it to be a good movie with a lot of good action, with good fights. People should get ready for the wolf, so can the people stop the wolf and fight it and win. So the movie is a bit dark, scary, etc. Hey, I thought it was a good fairy tale movie. Now I give this movie 70%. This is a review from September of 2017. 5 stars, laughably, because this is a 1-star movie. Somebody saying that there's good action fights. Well, you get some CGI of the werewolf for about maybe a full 1 minute and something seconds if you add it all up together. The rest of it is people fighting the werewolf, and all the people fighting the werewolf, they can clearly see the werewolf, but the camera is always in a position that the audience can barely get a good look at it, and I think that's an attempt to cover up the bad CGI of the werewolf, because the werewolf's just a gigantic dark black wolf that's completely CGI, and yeah, I think the audience wasn't supposed to get much of a look at it because it would be flawed and it would be off-putting because the CGI is not too great. Um, the movie is a bit dark. It's dark in almost like a video, straight to video type way. It's not dark where it has atmosphere of any kind. In fact, this movie has no atmosphere. It feels very stale. So the dark is more like just characters being in silhouette a lot where you can't see the detail. It looks like something that went straight to DVD that was shot on videotape, not on film. It's got that look to it. It's very bizarre. You can't suspend your disbelief or get into it because it just looks so cold and lifeless. 5 stars. Thought it was brilliant film. I love these live action remakes. No, this isn't even a remake of anything. This is like trying to meld a Twilight story with Little Red Riding Hood, and it fails at both of those. 5 stars again. I can't believe these 5-star reviews from February of 2017, no less. People hate on this movie all the time, but if I had to choose between this and any other overblown teen fantasy romance, I'd choose this one hands down. It's an interesting take on an old tale. It is way better than Twilight. No, I disagree. Twilight is complete garbage, but this movie is lower down and more boring than Twilight. At least Twilight had a bigger budget, and it was simply more entertaining because of that, and it had more locations. This is simply set all in a small soundstage with CGI shots sometimes to try and convince you that it's a gigantic medieval town in the mountains. Completely stupid. In fact, the set, the actual real life set doesn't match anything shown in the CGI. So right out of the gate, it just blows your verisimilitude, or it blows your suspension of disbelief out of the water. You just can't get into this and feel like any of it's real. It all feels fake. 1 star. Thank you, Hollywood, for ruining a classic novel. Such a shitty movie. I agree. 1 star. Red Riding Hood is a disappointing film. It is about a young girl falls for an orphaned woodcutter, much to her family's displeasure. Amanda Seyfried and Gary Oldman give horrible performances. The script is badly written. Catherine Hardwicke did a terrible job directing this movie. I was not impressed with this motion picture. Yeah, and I wasn't impressed by the running time. This is 2 hours. It's 2 hours, and it feels like it should have been like 85 minutes. It's really long and boring. And in fact, it opens with a scene where Little Red Riding Hood is very young. Maybe she's like 7 or 8 or 9 years old, and so is her first romantic interest, the young boy. And it opens with them trapping an obvious domesticated rabbit, not a wild rabbit, but they actually trapped a big giant white bunny in a kind of a fake bunny snare, and they're arguing with each other over which one of them is going to cut its throat, and then you never find out, and then that scene has no relevance to anything else in the movie. And there's a lot of stuff like that it just shows you pointless stuff, and it makes it long and drawn out. And even like Red Riding Hood walking from the village to her grandmother's cottage, just as long and drawn out and has no point to it. It doesn't contribute anything to the story. It just pads the running time. A lot of stuff just pads the running time and just never goes anywhere. 3 stars. I really like this movie because Amanda Seyfried is as hot and gorgeous and such a good actress. Well, maybe she is a good actress and she is gorgeous in some stuff. In this movie, she's just forgettable and boring, and she doesn't say anything interesting. She has no script to work with, so I would say 1 star. She doesn't make this movie any better than 1 star. 5 stars. We're in 2016 now. A very different story than the childhood Little Red Riding Hood, but a very good spin-off. Yes, she still goes to Grandma's house. Yes, she still meets a wolf, but it's way different. Yeah, and it's way stupid. It's stupid, boring, and pointless. 5 stars. It's such a beautiful movie for me. I would really love it if there's going to be a sequel. Maybe a story going about Valerie and Peter having a child and them being in danger and such. Wow, well, somebody's like 12 or 13 or 14, and actually, this inspired them to write a better story in their head, because a 13-year-old would have made a better Red Riding Hood story than what the director pumped out with this. This movie is that bad. It's so damn boring. 3 stars. No, it's a bad movie, but yes, very silly. They're contradicting themselves there. 5 stars. I really liked it. The only movie to make an interesting werewolf that I've seen. I'm surprised with all the bad reviews. Again, it's like this reviewer, Dustin C. He is like watching a different movie than everybody else is because it isn't this one. 1 star. Oh, for the love of all that is grim, what hath twilight wrought? Now with even more answer for, ex-production designer turned melodramatic TV special director Catherine Hardwicke has produced an excruciating Twilight clone that can only be described as one of the worst supernatural thrillers in recent memory, Red Riding Hood. Mythology has once again been reinvented, cashing in on familiarity rather than creativity by rearing its ugly head in the shape of a wolf. That's a lot of words to say that the director really screwed up. This is a much bigger screw up than Twilight. Yeah, this is just barely resembles Red Riding Hood. It looks like something that would be straight to video or straight to TV. The production values do. There are TV miniseries with much higher production values than this thing. There are standalone 90-minute TV shows with much higher production values than this movie. It's really bad. Melodramatic, yeah, but this fails. Everything is so dumb. Everything is so boring. 4 stars, pretty cool, pleasantly I watched, nicely done wolf. The wolf is CGI. You see about 1 minute and 20 seconds of it total in this film. It's not scary, it's boring. It's telepathic, by the way, because, like Twilight, you have telepathic monsters. It just has to be, I guess. 5 stars. This is a good movie. It is a mystery movie of who the werewolf is, and it has good music to this movie. This movie is scary and creepy. It would make a good Halloween movie. It is a good movie. I do not recommend this movie to children. This movie is like, in tone, it's something that's made for adults or juveniles, but it's in the visual department, it's like straight up PG with PG blood. It's completely stupid. There's no mystery to who the werewolf is because you just don't care. There's no reason why you should care. You suspect it's the grandma, and then by the time it tries to make you suspect other people, you just don't care anymore. 1 star. You want to see Twilight version of Red Riding Hood? Here it is. Positives, good-looking guys to distract you from the horrible plot. Negatives, Twilight continues. Okay. I don't know about the guys because I'm a guy. There wasn't anybody particularly ugly in this, even though werewolf was kind of good looking for a CGI werewolf. Again, it's not really a horror or a thriller or a suspense or a mystery. It's just a whole lot of boring visuals. 2.5 stars. While the story and characters are forgettable, especially Gary Oldman in a disappointing role, Catherine Hardwicke finds some salvation in its beautiful Twilight-like setting, enchanting score, and solid visual effect of the big bad wolf. A lot of nonsense there to unpack. Twilight-like setting. Twilight had much better setting. It had atmosphere. It had different locations. It was more interesting to look at, certainly, and it's not any masterpiece. No way. I bagged on it plenty. But this thing is just like a 12-year-old's really low-budget rendition of a Twilight story, and that's really bizarre. Catherine Hardwicke, if she actually was responsible for Twilight, then she actually disrespected her own work on this. That's pretty bad. 5 stars. Completely loved the story that I watched it 4 times in a row. Don't believe you. 1.5 star. Laughable but not offensive. Yeah, it's too boring to be offensive. It didn't offend me because I was simply just too damn bored, and it's got too much nonsense thrown in, like Vatican priests with black soldiers, excuse me, fake winter, a fake golden metallic solar system that was used to convince the villagers to go along with the werewolf hunting plan. What? This is just like, even Twilight's not this damn stupid. I mean, it's like, how low can you go? Was this the director actually trying to prove how low she could go? Did she actually fall over drunk in her own fake snow on set at one point? Because that's how bad this is. You know, there is a scene in which the villagers just dance around in the fake snow, and they don't even drink. Even their drinks they're holding in their hands are just empty cups, and they're just like, they look like, I don't know, a bunch of kids that were just thrown in on a casting call and told to dance around in the fake snow. completely stupid. August 31st of 2015, 1.5 stars. Perhaps I don't belong to the target audience of it, but it looks fake to me. If everything is covered by snow, it's cold, but then where's the breadth of the people? Breath of the people. It looks like a poor, lonely village, but then why everybody has new and clean dresses? Who is in charge in that village? You'll like it if you were a fan of Twilight, I think. No, it's worse than Twilight. Again, they're saying everything looks fake. Like, their clothes look fake, the setting looks fake, the buildings look fake, the snow is fake, the atmosphere is fake, the winter is fake. The only thing that's not fake, or there's actually real actors in this, but somehow if they could have been put in as CGI with a bigger budget, maybe the director would have done that, because everything in this is fake. That is true. 2.5 stars. First of all, Red Riding Hood is not a serious horror movie at all. It's not scary in any form. Its love-hate relationship over two guys for one pretty blonde girl is very Twilight and makes the whole thing a little tedious. Yeah, it's very tedious. The romance overshadows what is a well-built fairy tale supernatural theme within an old superstitious village. I really did like the ties to the book. I believed in the fear of the village, and while suspense lacked, I didn't work out the mystery element to the movie. You're giving this too much credit. There was no mystery here, no tension here. Nothing about this was believable for longer than like 10 seconds. Please. 1.5 stars. The movie has great cinematography and action sequences, but that can't save the cliched script, mediocre acting, and horrible dialogue. You're giving this too much credit, too. There was no great cinematography here. I'm sorry. No. There just wasn't. Shaky cam. There's like 2 or 3 shaky cam sequences that are supposed to scare us, and they're not even from the perspective of the werewolf, just from other characters walking up behind the Red Riding Hood. What is that? I don't know. 1 star. The hell even was this? Yeah, exactly. The hell did I just watch? WTF. 1 star. This isn't Red Riding Hood. This is Twilight. Like, some of the dialogue is the exact same as from Twilight. When the wolf talked, I literally laughed out loud. Avoid this trashy, poorly acted piece of junk by all means. Yeah, you know, when the wolf was telepathically talking to Red Riding Hood, that was very much like something you would see in Twilight. It very much was. And it wasn't explained who the voice of this werewolf was. I mean, the movie did try to tell you that the dad was the werewolf the whole time, but the werewolf spoke in a completely different, romantically, gravelly, ominous voice that was not Billy Burke's. And it was clear that the werewolf had romantic intentions with Red Riding Hood, but then that was her dad later. It doesn't really. Oh my gosh. 1 star. Red Riding Hood's unnecessarily wannabe grit style and plotting script dooms the mess right from the get-go. There really isn't a reason for this to exist other than get teens scared. This wouldn't even scare a teenager. I'm sorry, but I find it hard to believe even a teenager could sit through much of this without being bored. I bet they checked out about 34 minutes, just like I wanted to shut this off at about the same point. 4 stars. It's a pretty good movie, and I really enjoyed watching it. It has an interesting story with some good acting. I don't think so. I don't think you even watched this. This is like copy and pasted from another review. I don't believe you. 3 stars. Well, it's better than Freeway and takes some stuff from In the Company of Wolves, but it reminds me of Twilight, seeing it's got the same director. It's not bad as Twilight, but it's a weak movie, especially for this kind of genre. I'm not even sure what kind of genre this is. It's not a mystery, it's not a thriller, it's not a horror, it's a laughable love story, so I guess it's a romantic genre, like a love story genre. It fails at that too. I'm not sure what this is supposed to be, really. It's all over the place. It's just boring. Could there be a genre actually called boring? Then this is the boring genre, I think. 1.5 stars. Another child's classic story turned into a dark tale, but sadly it's been turned into a sycophantic tribute to the Twilight series. We even get a Robert Pattinson lookalike to play the moody heartthrob. Instead of a dark tale, which I guess they were aiming for, we get a sickly teen love story with a menacing werewolf lurking in the background. It's tedious and somewhat predictable. I say somewhat because it does keep you guessing who the werewolf is within the village, or maybe I was so bored out of my mind. Yeah, 1 star. 2 stars, intense and suspenseful, but with a lot of things that all of us had seen on TV, not very original and predictable. Again, this is worse than a TV movie. It comes across as more fake and low budget than it made for TV movie. It's an embarrassment. If this had run on like even the Lifetime channel, it would have been considered bad. But this was actually released in the movie theaters, and I'm glad that nobody I know heard of it at the time. I'm glad they weren't traumatized by actually having their, butts sore in a seat for 2 hours after they paid to see this in the theater. It would have been very, very enraging for anybody. So you have a 10% on the tomato meter and a 39% on the audience score. And if I had to say what I feel the audience score should have rightly been in this, I think it should have been a 9% on the audience score, because no matter what the critics said, this should have been a little bit lower, because there was nothing to be found in this at all except boredom. 2 hours of straight boredom, and I'm just glad when I shut this puppy off, I was glad to be done with it. So I'm going to be done with this episode, and I'm going to see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.